I made and mixed this in a matter of minutes, and it's one of the easiest programs I've ever used to make music. Hey, what's up? This is Noize London. Today with Soundtrap, we're going to be taking a look at what mixing is and how to apply it to different elements in your track to get them to sound way, way better. If you're not familiar with mixing, this is basically the process that producers or engineers use to make their track sound better. It's about applying a series of effects like EQ, reverb, distortion, and many more to enhance the elements of your track so that they sound good individually and all together. So make sure to sign up for a premium account today to get your first month free. And if you want this project, the link is in the description below, so you can check it out and have your own go at what I'm doing today. I've been messing around, throwing some sounds together, and I've ended up with something that sounds a little deep housey. Now, when making dance music, one of the main objectives is to get the kick to sound big. I'm going to open up the kick, go to effects, and then you'll see here that I added 3 different effects to get to where I need to be. So let's have a listen just by itself. First thing I noticed was that the kick didn't have enough punch in the low end and had too many mids. It's got this kind of boxy, hollow sound. So I added an equalizer, this one here. And in order to find these frequencies that I don't like, what I do is I boost them and then bring them down. Now I know that I was aiming roughly for the low and low mids, but this might take a bit of experimentation to get your ears tuned and adjusted to what you think should be taken out or boosted. Let's try adding some low end. So we can hear by increasing that fader, we're starting to add more punch and body to the base of the kick. Let's try with and without. Now, a lot of the times, kicks sound big, not necessarily because of the bass, but because of the high frequencies. So I did add this brighter plugin. I'm just going to turn this on, pull it back, and add it gently so you can see how it starts to increase the presence, which draws our ears to the clickiness of the kick. Too much and it starts to get uncomfortable, just enough and it gives it presence, which helps cut through the mix. Now, last but not least, I added a clipper from the distortion section, this purple one here, to increase the mix all the way because we do want the full effect. And then we're going to slowly increase the amount. This distorts really quickly, so just make sure that you're very gentle and subtle with this effect, because we're not going for a distorted sound, but we are trying to give our kick a little bit of clipping, which is essentially a type of distortion to help enhance the volume. All right, so next I added this hat. Before I added these effects, it sounded like this, which is fine, but it's a bit dry and up front, and I wanted to give it a bit of character and push it back in the mix and give it a bit of depth. So I started with a slapback delay. You'll hear that the delay is very short, and by having that short delay, what that means is that we have this kind of reflection going on as if it's in a small room. I'm not trying to make it too obvious. Next, I added some room reverb. I like the closed room because, again, it's really short and tight, so it's not too obvious and taking over. Reverb tends to make things a little wider, and also it makes them come alive. It makes them feel like they're recorded in a real space as opposed to manufactured from a machine. And then I threw on the equalizer because I wanted a bit more brightness, but there was also some harshness. Increasing and decreasing those sliders, exaggerating the movement so our ears really pick up on what's changing. And then it felt a little bit harsh, so I also decided to pull down some of the frequencies. Next, I added this really cool percussion, which had a slightly reggaeton feel to it. Great sound, great rhythm, but it felt like it was conflicting ever so slightly with the kick and the hat, and I wanted to make it a little more interesting. So I started with a bit of clipping. Again, to cut off those transients. So sometimes when things are too punchy, try add a clipper and notice how it will soften the punch, by also adding a little bit of distortion and tone so you don't just lose the character. Next, I used a compressor for exactly the same reason, but a clipper and a compressor work in different ways. A compressor will reduce the volume of a sound once it crosses the threshold. Now, what's useful about this is that I can put a compressor with a really fast attack, so it's clamping down on that volume straight away as soon as the signal comes in, then it lifts the volume up. So I can have the overall volume of that sound a lot higher without it taking up too much space. Next, I added a delay, a phaser to give it this weird comb filtering feel, which also spreads it across the stereo field. Because the phaser isn't synchronized to the BPM, every single hit of that percussion now sounds slightly different depending on where the phaser is. I took down the volume ever so slightly because all these effects were adding quite a bit. And then added a filter where I cut out the low and high frequencies. So what I'm doing here is I'm mixing each sound into its own respective space. Kick really looking after the low end, yeah, better the high end with the click, and then the hat really looking after the high end, and then this percussion sitting somewhere in the middle, all tucked in. Okay, next let's go to one of my favorite things to mix, which is the bass. I thought the sound was really cool, but in order for it to sound bigger and more impactful, I knew we were going to have to do a little bit of work. Let's go with an equalizer. There were some tones in this bass that I didn't really like. So immediately I pulled them out. Now I want to add a little bit more bass, a bit more sub. Let's also add a few more high frequencies. This now sounds a lot deeper and thicker, which is what you really want from a bass sound. Next, I hit it with the compressor. Now I'm using the compressor to control the dynamic. I want my kick to be punchy. I want my bass to feel a little more controlled and a little softer. So I'm going with a really fast attack, a release, medium release. We'll come back to release, ratio of 4.1 to 1. Start with a fast attack, have a medium release. So something like the settings that you see here, ratio 4.1 to 1. That's like a magic ratio. It's a good middle ratio that you can apply to lots of different sounds. And then with the threshold, what you want to do is you always want to over compress, really slam that sound so you can hear exactly what's going on. So the main thing to listen out for here is how we're losing a little bit of the punch and we're getting a bit more sustain out of the sound. As the compressor comes down, it's a volume fader, right? And it also has to come back up. So as it comes back up on the tail of the sound, it lifts up the volume of the tail of the sound. So the release of the sound ends up sounding thicker. Next, I did want the bass to feel more focused on the low frequencies, so I went ahead and I added a filter. And I'm just using the high cut here to take out some of that fizz. Now, I also think that fizz might interfere with the hi-hat and the top end of the kick, so I am thinking not just about the individual sound, but how it plays into everything else in my track. Last but not least, I did feel like it was lacking a little bit of that sub and that low end, so I went ahead and added a parametric EQ. Now, I'm bringing this over to the left to make this a nice wide band. So this means it's going to affect more frequencies in the low end. It's not going to be very specific and surgical. And then I'm just using the gain and increasing this to add those low frequencies into the mix. And let's hear it in the mix. Last but not least, the chords. I played those on the MIDI keyboard, just recorded that straight in, and effects wise, I went a little crazy here. I was just trying to do a little more sound design than I was necessarily mixing. And I think mixing and sound design, they can be very similar. think of sound designers, I'm going to change the shape of my sound, and mixing is more, I'm going to refine it. But the two play into each other quite nicely. So you might find that when you're sound designing, it feels like you're mixing, and vice versa. So I added the compressor 1. Then the equalizer was added to bring out some of the low frequencies and also bring out some of the harshness in the highs. After taking out the harsh frequencies though, I did want to make it a little bit brighter, which feels really cool. Then we've got the stereo chorus. Now with the pads, it actually already had its own effects. So I had this compressor, which added some sustain, the equalizer, which is taking out low frequencies and some of the harsh high frequencies, brighter and stereo chorus. And then this is pretty much all me. So altogether, everything sounds like this. There are some great tools in Soundtrap that you can use on all your tracks, especially if you're new to making music. Remember to subscribe to Soundtrap Premium today and get your first month free, and the link to this project is in the description down below. Get stuck in, don't be afraid to experiment, and ultimately have fun. It's a pleasure as always, and a big love from Noize. Peace!